Stanford Alternative Video Education, saving spring quarter 2020, allowing you to go to Stanford no matter where you are. I'm Steve Palumbi, and this is the first video lecture for Biology Course 140, The Science of the Extreme Life of the Sea. And what we're going to do in this course is talk about ocean life in extreme conditions, the deepest parts of the ocean, the shallowest, the hottest, the coldest, and how those organisms live their lives. We'll bring up the science of what we know about them, and then use that science to ask how they manage to thrive despite all these odds. We'll also talk about how we can use that knowledge to tell the stories of these species, because that's the second part of this course. It's how to write about these kinds of living creatures, how to write about them in a narrative style that brings the science in front of everybody who wants to read those stories. So it's the combination of the science and the writing that we really are focusing on in this course. And we're going to start in this class by looking at epic battles, the amazing interactions among organisms that define how they live their lives in the ocean. And we're going to start with one of the biggest battles that there is, and that's the battle between sperm whales and giant squid. And we see this battle all the time in things like this diorama from the American Museum of Natural History, or this drawing, or this painting. But the interesting thing about this battle is that we have never seen it. We've never seen this interaction between sperm whales and giant squid. We've never seen the battle really take place. So what have we seen about this battle, and how do we know it even exists? What do we know that tells us how the battle takes place and why? Well, we know there are scars on the sperm whale heads that come from squid. There are large squid beaks in sperm whale stomachs. And there's some just beginnings of elusive videos about giant squid out in their environment. Let's start by understanding a little bit about how sperm whales actually live, where they forage, the kinds of things they do during their daily lives. First, they are diving animals. They will dive a quarter mile to a half mile deep. They'll do that once an hour all day, mostly for feeding. And we know that by people putting tags on sperm whale and following them during their day as they're diving. So this is a track of the dive profile of a sperm whale over the course of a couple of hours. And what you can see with the black here is the actual depth of the animal, and then the orange tracing here is the speed that that whale was swimming at as it's going down or coming back up. And then if you look even a little bit deeper into each of those tracks, if you take just this part of that track and expand it out, then you can see this dive trace here and the speeding up of the whale right here. This is probably the time when the whale is actually beginning to forage down at this depth. The kind of depth we're talking about here is about 600 to 700 meters, say a half a mile down. In this next dive, a little while later, you can see a couple of periods where the animal has accelerated greatly. Those are probably also feeding periods. So we can track a little bit what the whales are doing during the course of the day with this kind of information, but it doesn't tell us exactly what they are feeding on. So that's where we go to stomach contents. So for sperm whales, they are eating a wide variety of different kinds of creatures down at that depth, but they're also dominated by squid, particularly the giant squid, Architeuthis, and the colossal squid, Mesonicoteuthis, that are the biggest prey. They make up to about 8 to 10% of the diet of whales that have been looked at. What is a squid beak, and how can we tell when we find them in squids in whale stomachs. So this is a picture of a squid beak. You can think of this as being made of a structure like, it's a keratin structure like your fingernails. There are two beaks that the squid has. Effectively, they kind of were working like a parrot beak. The top and the bottom one there, squid is using them to bite prey and to chew through it. Squid don't have bones, so this is really one of the only hard parts that these squid have. Because they are particularly unique to this kind of organism, we know when we find those in the sperm whale stomach that they come from squid, and the big ones come from giant squid. Because they're keratin, this very tough protein, they don't digest very quickly, and so that's why they build up in sperm whale stomachs. Now, the Architeuthis has a very particular kind of squid beak, relatively short rostrum with no ridge on it, and we can use that information to sort through the squid beaks you can get out of a sperm whale stomach, like these, a wide variety of different types, and then find out which one of those are from giant squid. Of course, these are all shown at the same size. The giant squid ones stand out because they are so big. Along that way, we can begin to try to understand a little bit about how whales actually feed. Sperm whales are a kind of whale called a toothed whale. That's distinguished from the filter-feeding whales called the baleen whales, like blue whales, gray whales, humpback whales. And those whales swallow large masses of water with very tiny prey, filter out the water to feed on the prey. But sperm whales are toothed whales, like dolphins, porpoise, killer whales. They're going after individual prey and chasing them and taking them. So it makes sense that sperm whales have teeth. The interesting thing about sperm whales and their teeth is that they don't actually get their teeth until they're sexually mature. And there are some large sperm whales that have been captured with no teeth at all. So it's a little bit of a mystery still what these teeth actually do for sperm whales and the role they play in sperm whale feeding. We also can't really talk about the biology of sperm whales without understanding a bit about our history with them and their population size. So this is the population size of sperm whales over the course of the last couple hundred years, estimated to be 1 million or more sperm whales in the world before whaling. But then, starting in the 1700s, sperm whale oil became an incredibly valuable commodity. That started a whole fleet, a whole ocean, a whole global industry of sperm whaling that drove the numbers down. This is an estimate of the population size of sperm whales that was back calculated by Hal Whitehead, suggesting that there was a slow decline until about 1850 or so, a steep drop, and then a huge drop in the 1940s and 50s as sperm whaling became a mechanized industry from a fleet of boats that had modern engines and modern harpoons. So we know at this point that the sperm whale population that exists right now is only a fraction of what it had been a couple of centuries ago. So that sort of sets the stage. There's not as many whales as before. They're actively hunting a half-mile or a quarter-mile down. They're actively hunting squid. We can tell what the diet is by the squid beaks in their stomach. And that tells us that there are these interactions between sperm whales and squid. And we know that that battle that I was talking about must be going on. But what do we know about the interaction of these two individuals, the sperm whale and the squid, when they actually meet one another? So one of the best sets of evidence about that comes from the scars that we see on the whales themselves. So this is an image of a piece of whale skin, and on it are these circular scars. Those circles aren't natural to the whale itself. They match in size and shape and texture the suckers that come, you see on the tentacles of the giant squid. That's shown on this side, these suckers here along each of the tentacles of the giant squid. We can zoom in a little bit on that, and you can see that the suckers of the giant squid aren't just suction cups. They actually have a ring of keratin, again, the same protein that made up the beak. In this case, the ring has barbs all along it, like that. So the giant squid, when it attaches to something and hunkers down on it, is actually using these suction cups with this ring of barbs all around. That's what the squid is using to hang on to its own food. And what it does then for whales is leave these scars on the outside of the whale. So every time you see a scar like that on the outside of a sperm whale, you know that it's been in a fight with a giant squid. The giant squid leaving these scars behind, and also maybe leaving its beak in the stomach of the sperm whale. So what do we actually know about giant squid? The genus is called Architeuthis. This is an image that was taken just a couple of years ago of a giant squid coming up after a bait off the coast of Japan. There's a number of YouTube videos you can look at that have some elusive pictures of these animals, which have never really been seen that often in the wild, and very seldom have they been seen alive. We call them giant squid because they are pretty long. Here's the basic structure of almost any squid, especially the giant squid. The body has stabilizing fins and a mantle with large eyes, and then there's 8 arms and then 2 feeding tentacles that come out at the very front end. At the end of those feeding tentacles are tentacular clubs, they're called, which is one of the ways that the giant squid manages to catch prey, actually quite a ways from its body, grab hold of it, and then pull that prey back into its mouth. Give you an idea of the relative size: sperm whale 18 meters, giant squid 13 meters, and a human. Of that 13 meters giant squid, most of it is tentacles. The body itself still is a couple, 4 or 5 meters long. So because it's big, it has a lot of features about it that are the biggest. So the body, 5 to 8 meters, the largest eyes in the world, about 11 inches. But like all cephalopods, this animal has really fast maturity. Now, a sperm whale that it might be fighting with could be 30, 40, 50, 80 years old, but giant squids mature very fast. They mature and get to adult size in about 3 years. But they start off with eggs that are only 1 millimeter across, and so they are actually recorded as having some of the largest, fastest weight gain of any organism in the ocean, going from tiny egg to gigantic 200 kilogram animals in just a few years. But they're not the only big squid out there in the ocean. Giant squid were the first to be really discovered and looked at, and then came the colossal squid. So colossal is bigger than giant. I'll give you an idea here. The sort of scale size of a person there, and the scale body of the colossal squid. We haven't seen as many of those as we've seen giant squid. This is just an image of one being pulled up on the side of a boat in New Zealand. We know that they are there and part of the sperm whale's diet. Why? Again, because of the scars that are left behind by these squid on whale heads. And we can tell the difference between the scars of the giant squid and the colossal squid because the barbs that they have on their tentacles are so different from one another. So for colossal squid, about 2.5 meter length mantle before the eyes, and then the large tentacles that come out. Those tentacles have suckers on them so that when they grab hold of a prey, those hooks come down and dig in to their prey. That leaves a very different kind of scar on the head of sperm whales. And we can tell from that and where the sperm whales are living that mostly the colossal squid is part of the sperm whale diet, mostly in the Southern Ocean, in the Southern Hemisphere, very seldom in the Northern Hemisphere. So where does that sort of leave us with this biggest battle that we've never seen? We know a lot about it. We know where and when sperm whales feed. They feed half mile to a quarter mile deep on these periodic dives they do. When they're down there, they encounter a wide variety of different kind of prey. Every once in a while, there must be giant squid because we see their beaks in the stomachs. Then we see the scars, which means that the animals, when they're grappling with one another, the tentacles must wrap around the head of the whales, which is depicted in this drawing, because otherwise the scars wouldn't be on the head of those whales. What we don't know is whether sometimes the squid escape. We have no idea what the success rate is of sperm whales eating a giant squid when they're in this kind of embrace. We would be able to tell, perhaps, if we could find giant squid that had some of their tentacles bitten off by sperm whales, but we have very, very few of those animals that have come up into scientific inquiry. Even with only these few clues, however, we can build a pretty good picture of what the battle must be like. It's dark, it's cold, it's deep. Neither of these animals can see each other from very far away. When they encounter one another, it's a huge, big, massive food for the sperm whale, and it's an enormous, unheard of danger for the giant squid. When they're grappling with one another, it must take a little bit of time, else the giant squid wouldn't be able to make those scars on the sperm whale head. And it must happen pretty often in order for almost every sperm whale to have these scars and have beaks in their stomach. So this is sort of an example of looking into the data from wherever source you can find it, trying to find out enough about each of those individual parts of the life of these animals, how deep the sperm whales go, how fast the Architeuthis grow, and then building a picture of this story depending upon those scientific facts. Well, this is not the only epic battle in the ocean. There's lots of them. The battles tend to be pretty big across the global ocean, but sometimes actually the interactions are small. So, for example, the battle for space all around coral reefs is something that is happening continuously. This is an image of a very crowded coral reef with branching corals all around and a mounding coral in the center. These corals grow slowly over hundreds of years. These corals grow very quickly over the scale of decades, and they're battling for the same amount of space on the reef that's there. We can look at that as a battle for how organisms find a place to live. We can talk about that one, but I want to end this with talking about a very different kind of organism, something that you maybe have never heard very much about, but has a very different kind of battle for space going on. And that's a kind of critter called a sea squirt. Sea squirts are colonial organisms. They are kind of tunicate. They're a kind of chordate like us, a urochordate. They grow in colonies across surfaces, mostly in temperate parts of the ocean. And they grow so quickly and they grow in such profusion that they are often running into one another and battle it out for space. A sea squirt has a colonial anatomy like this. Each of these 5 rosettes there, they almost look like flowers, are called systems. And each system is made up of a number of zooids. Each zooid is an animal in its own right. It has all the moving and important necessary parts for a full animal to live. They're all colonial, so they're all genetically identical to one another. This colony then grows by the individual zooids growing, making more zooids in a system and making more systems in this colony. And it spreads out across the surface pretty quickly. The anatomy allows us to know that this is all one organism. It has a central siphon where the water's coming out. It has several individual siphons on each zooid where water's pumped in. These are filter feeding organisms. Well, what happens when this critter that's growing across the surface meets another one that's also growing across the surface? What happens in this particular case for individuals from the same species that meet is that the edge of their colonies come together and the edges begin to interact with one another. And these particular animals, these colonial tunicates, have a way of telling their self from non-self. They have an immune system like ours that can tell host from graft. That would be an immunological set of terms. It can tell the individual from another individual of a different genotype. And if the individuals are close enough, maybe they're actually part of the same colony that's been split off some other way, they'll join and fuse together. But if the individuals are different genotypes, then they'll come together. That immune reaction will say no, reject that interaction, and they won't fuse. However, there's a couple of cases in which this reaction goes a different way. And those cases are where two colonies come together and the immune system says, all right, they're not the same individual, and so they should reject a fusion and they should stay separate. But instead of just that happening, then one individual will inject blood cells into the other one. Those blood cells will go in through, they'll sift through the organism that's there and try to take it over. They won't take over the whole body of the organism. What they'll do is they'll go into the gonads of this other organism. They'll eject the cells that are making up that other organism there, and then the cells from this colony will flow into that one, take over the gonad, and start making eggs and sperm that are genetically like the yellow one instead of the blue one. So this kind of battle for space, in fact, doesn't try to take space from another colony. What it does is let that colony keep the space. It just takes over all the reproduction of that colony by essentially ejecting the gonad cells from the blue one by invading cells from the yellow one. So those are sorts of the kinds of things that we're going to do in this class. We're going to talk about ocean life in extreme conditions, and then talk about how to turn those into narrative stories that will build science knowledge about in people. But also allow people to take the science that they're learning in this class and other classes and learn how to think about that in different kinds of ways. The assignments in this class will be based upon writing assignments that build those skills, and we'll move through a couple of different kinds of doing narrative writing during the course of the course. So that's what we're going to try to do. The next lecture up starts us off with the history of life in the ocean, the evolution of life on planet Earth, but also the kinds of features that evolved in the ocean that we take for granted now, but were basically invented by different ocean creatures hundreds of millions of years ago. Thanks.